Welcome back to the A4Q Testing Summit. We welcome Rajeev with us today. Unfortunately, Renzo is unable to join us due to some technical difficulties, but we assure you that Rajeev will be conducting this presentation thoroughly. Today, Rajeev will be talking about the documentation in Agile testing, and we look forward to hearing more information about this. Before we start, I would just like to encourage our viewers to interact with this session in the comment section from wherever you're watching. And after the session, there will be the option to vote for your best speaker. This is available on the program on our website. Rajeev, over to you.
Thank you so much, Abby, and welcome to all, irrespective of the location you are. So, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are currently. And thank you once again, Abby and A4Q, for allowing me to share some of my experiences with the professionals out here. So, can we have the deck on the scene? Great. Okay, so today we are going to discuss about documentation in agile testing. Seems very weird. Agile talks about documentation. We think about Agile says no documentation. Agile does it even say anything about documentation? Okay, let's see what the reality is and what the expectations are. Can we really live without documentation? Let's go ahead on this journey, understanding documentation in the agile world, in- especially related to the testing part. Can we move to the next one? Okay, so some of the things we are going to cover today: agile myths, values, principles. Don't worry, I will not take a boring session on reading all the myths and values, but there is a discussion required related to the documentation. We'll try to see some of the real life scenario, how the testing teams are currently placed. Though testing sounds to be anti-agile world because we call it a scrum team or a squad which is cross-functional, and testers are part of that. But we do hear testing teams also in this so-called agile or fragile world. Um, some of the documents that you need to work on, most of you are actually aware of those documents. We'll just refresh those and we'll discuss in detail, right, how those documents can actually be documented during the session, during your day-to-day work, challenges you face, and what are the possible solutions to those. And please make best use of the chat window or the comment section. I'll be asking some questions. You're free to respond. I'll be able to see those. This will help me to customize my answers, customize the replies, and customize my approach over next 50 minutes. And a few prerequisites. I'm assuming most of you are aware of Agile Basics. We'll not be covering Agile Basics in today's session. And most of you understand some of the testing docs which are used on day-to-day basis. As we'll not be covering those documents in detail, but we'll be covering how to effectively document those documents and what are the documents you need to actually take care of. So please do make best use of the chat window, write in your questions, write in your concerns. We'll try to address as many as we can. We'll have a Q&A session in the end, and if still your question is not answered, you are most welcome to reach A4Q or at the raise.society37@gmail.com. Don't hold on your question. Chances are your questions will increase after the session because you might be looking for the implementation. That's what we are anticipating for. How it goes, let's see. Can we move on? Maybe. I'm sure most of you must have seen these agile values multiple times. I'm not reading those again. But at the bottom there, the statement says, while there is a value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. Some of us miss out this reading this statement completely. Are you one among those? Do you know what does this mean? If yes, you're free to type in the chat window and try to see your comments, your replies. But this is very important element. Let's read the second value, which says working software over comprehensive documentation. Most misread value of the Agile Manifesto, I can easily say. Some of us start interpreting this way that it says no documentation. It's only saying working software over comprehensive documentation. It has nothing to say there is no documentation. And if you read the statement at the bottom, while there is a value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. So it's not we are ignoring the documentation. But yes, primary focus is working software and documentation is also required. How much? We'll discuss that. Have you agreed on what is your definition of comprehensive? Definition of yours and mine may differ, and definition of your leaders, your maintenance support teams, that will differ. Let's go on and see what does this mean further. Okay, can we move on? Okay, let's visit some of the agile principles also. Don't worry, I'll not read all the principles. I'll just highlight some of the points. Abby, can we move on? I'm sure you must have read this multiple times. I'm not going to read any of those, but highlight some of the words part, right? We talk about customer satisfaction, useful software, changing requirement, right? This is the best uh, excuse by the product owners or the product teams, right? Agile says anything can change anytime, right? And they keep changing the scope during the sprint. Working software, face-to-face conversation, continuous attention, self-organizing, regular adaptation, all these things we keep hearing. Do you see anywhere about documentation in these principles? I don't read. In the values, there was one mention of the comprehensive documentation. In the principles, there was only not even a single mention. So is Agile actually silent about documentation? Do you find enough information about documentation? At least I don't find enough insights, enough information. Except this value which says working software over comprehensive documentation, which many of us read it as no documentation. But is it actually no documentation? Can you really survive with no documentation? Especially in the virtual world, when the teams are spread globally, you are working with different time zones, somebody in US, somebody in EMEA, somebody in Asia Pacific, and maybe some Australia too. When you're working with such a global team, you don't get a chance to meet them in person. Can you really survive without documentation? Agile don't say anything about documentation except this four value. Let's see what can we do today to address this silence. Can we make Agile speak on the documentation? Let's try to attempt that part. AB, can we move on? And yes, please feel free to type in your comments, questions, wherever you are, so that we try to address that after the session. And if there is something very relevant, we may pick up during the call itself. Okay, so some of the agile myths, very popular. Agile easy, instant benefits, silver bullet, and in our local language in India, which is Hindi, we call it Ramba, right? Which is solution to everything, just like a silver bullet. Another myth is no documentation. We are exposed in agile, agile equal to scrum, agile journey is smooth and rosy. This is very common. Okay, just hire the agile coaches and you will be agile. Man, this is not possible. So agile coaches are more like physicians who can prescribe, who can be with you if required, but they will not be on the ground zero to play agility with you. You will be the one who will be performing. So you have to do all the hard work. Okay. And there is nothing like no documentation. There is documentation. What documentation we are going to discuss. Let's move on. In traditional, I think all of you know documentation is at almost all the stages. You start from inception to delivery to support to maintenance and everything in between. Okay. Without document, you don't even start. Okay. When something is handed over to you, you look for the design document, you look for the analysis document, for the customer requirement, you look for acceptance, all these things, right? In testing your multiple document, the strategy, the testing scope, all these documents you look for. But do you have the same set of document in Agile? Maybe not, right? Let's visit some of the Agile basics first before coming back to the documentation part, right? So that you can relate when and where the documents are required or used. Can we move on? I'm sure most of you must have seen this framework zillions of times, if not millions, right? That's a basic high level framework. So again, each organization, each team has adopted as per their specific requirements. That's the generic framework we talk about, where we have sprint backlog, all these things during sprint ranging from 2 to 4 weeks. There are sprints with a higher duration, there are sprints with the lower duration. All these things are there. Okay, let's move on. And comes the this part, the sprint, the actual sprint, where which is of a anything can be 1 to 4 or 2 to 4 weeks. Who owns this? What is your role in this particular sprint? Is there anything you need to do prior to sprint? Is there a thing called backlog grooming, backlog refinement? It's nowhere mentioned in the Scrum, but latest Scrum guides even talk about those events. These are very important events, which are not prescribed events, but very important, play a very important role. But what these events or this thing has to do with the documentation, right? Do you document anything anywhere? If yes, what? Apart from user stories, is there anything on top of this, or everything is the user story itself? Can we move on? Can you come to the previous one? Yeah. Okay. So whether it's backlog grooming, it's sprint, finished product, retrospective, don't you think at every stage we have something or other which is documented? You have the user stories getting updated during backlog grooming or backlog refinement stage. We also revisit our definition of done, definition of ready. We revisit our retrospectives to have some action items. Action items again are documented. During the sprint, you document the test cases. Before the sprint, you need to have some documents ready. What those documents are, we'll visit in a moment from now. Okay. Retrospective, you have the action items based on the feedback. Again, there's a documentation. Every stage, there is a documentation involved. And most important documentation is before the sprint itself, the backlog grooming or the backlog refinement stage. And once the sprint completes, after that, also there's a lot of documentation. And is there any documentation before the sprint starts, apart from backlog refinement? Let's see on those also. Can we move on, maybe? Yeah, I'm sure all of you are aware of these documents. Strategy, which is before the sprint, because it is beyond the scope of the sprint. Okay. Testing plan, right? A plan before the sprint and after the sprint. Test cases, mostly within the sprint, you cover this part. Okay. Issue creation. There could be within the sprint, there could be before sprint, there could be after sprint issues, all this part. Release documentation checklist. You contribute a lot in the release documentation by sharing information like what bugs are fixed, what are not fixed, what is required, what is not required, what is going in releases. You contribute a lot. And then the release notes also, you talk about all these things, part, right? The thing somehow we miss out is, you know about the document that you are actually writing for others, not for yourself. That's the important part which somehow we miss out in this entire journey. And because of this, we start thinking, why do we need a document? Why do we need the documentation? If we are one, two, four, a maximum within 10 people. We know everything. Why do we need to document? Because you're not documenting for the team who's working currently. You're documenting for the people who are going to use it in the at a later stage. Also, within the team, when it's a globally distributed team, not all the people are able to attend all the meetings and events. Documentation is required. Another element, when there is a clarification happening between two, three individuals, one person is missing, and we exchange the emails, we have a call, but we miss out to document those findings in the user story. And the person who comes next is not even aware of those. There is another gap, which result into many iterations. And all these virtual settings, globally distributed teams, and too much of dependency on external stakeholders need the documentation. Let's see, you know all these docs. How and when you need to document, who can help all in the document, right? Let's see first of the scope of this document. Let's visit the scope part. What is the scope of this document? Can we move on? Yeah, so I don't know if you have ever paid attention to this part, the testing scope. There is a scope during the sprint, there is a scope after the sprint. And this must be clearly defined in two documents, which is definition of done and definition of ready. So some of the examples, I'm not hard coding this, right? You might be including feature, functional, non-functional, acceptance, performance, system, and unit testing during the sprint. You might be having different names or jargons also for this. So let's not get into those that not we are not having this, we are having this. There are some examples. That's for you to decide what all should be part of the sprint testing. What is before sprint, what is after sprint. And after sprint, maybe UAT, integration, smoke, sanity, segregation, white box, volume, whatever the case may be. Is this defined anywhere? If not, that's the first step you need to do. Define the testing scope. And where will you define? Use your definition of done for this. Definition of done is another document. It is not something which resides in your mind. It's a document that must be updated. What is the scope of testing within the sprint? What is the scope of testing after the sprint? Have you prepared a definition of done document, or is it just in your heads? If it's in your head, bring it on the paper. Bring it over some central repository. Don't keep it in your head. Okay, can we move on? So let's visit some of the typical ways how the test people are involved in the agile ways of working. An ideal world where you have a typical cross-functional team. When we say cross-functional team, we have all set of skills within the sprint team. So each Scrum team has dedicated tester, whatever term you want to use, whether developer or engineer or whatever it is. Let's not have a discussion on those part. Basically, you have the people, all the skills ready to deliver And testing is one of the skills which is required to deliver. That's an ideal one. Do you have that? If not, check. Go for it. This is the best one to have it. In case you don't have it, what other options are there? Can we move on? If you are using the scaled agile, I'm not going to explain what the scaled agile is. In case you're using this, right? And there could be a possibility you have one dedicated separate testing team. Yes, I have seen that. In many agile environments, people create dedicated testing team catering to multiple development team. I have seen that multiple times. You must have seen that part also. Okay. They are part of a release team, not a typical Scrum team. Okay. So development is done, then they come into the picture and start testing. That happens in a cycle of 2 to 4 months, depending on what your scaled agile duration is, depending on that part. That's another possibility. And third one is, can we move on? A single testing team, traditional agile independent testing team, not linked to anyone, right? You are always in the queue. And yes, I have even heard a statement from one of the very big software organization, Rajeev, can you help our testing team make agile? And for me, that was a beautiful culmination of agility. Okay, so we still have independent testing team where development team are in the queue to get their development tested. These things are still happening. If you have any other scenarios, please do share those, how your team is configured, how you are handling your testing. Do you have a typical cross-functional, a scaled one, a single, or some other combinations, irrespective of the team you are into? Okay, these tips which we are going to share will be helpful to all of you. What those tips are? And yes, please keep typing your feedback, your comments, your questions in the chat window, in the comment section, so that we can address them at a later stage. Okay, so in these scenarios, the common challenges are test strategy itself is not defined, right? A complete laundry list. You have your own challenges, you have own your questions. If any questions you can type, which is not addressed here. Thing which I'm going to take up is one of the prominent part is the DOD or definition of ready. I don't know how many of you even know about this term, definition of ready. Do you have that? That's another document which you need to look into. Okay. Definition of done is not properly defined, or even if it's defined, it's never used. Even if it's used, it's never updated. There could be scenario does not even exist. And another element is the testers are not part of the estimation or the backlog development sessions. These two are the common things which I have seen in multiple places. Even if you are part of the those sessions, you are not involved. You becomes more of an observer, not a participant. Many teams say it is a developer's job, let them give the estimate. We are not required. And we keep having our pointers in mind. It may take 1 day, half day, 2 days, 4 days, depending on whatever we are thinking. We don't even discuss openly those parts. And since you keep your assumptions with you, you don't open out, it always create a mess during the last days of the sprint. Because those things were not discussed, those things were not even questioned. Okay. So these are the common challenges which you are going to think, right? From where will you get input to address these challenges? Any idea? Maybe I'll share my pointers. You may have your own set of individuals who might be sharing some inputs to address these challenges. Can we move on? And some of the individuals who can be good source of input for you are the people who are involved in coding, people who are involved in documentation, those who are writing the help files, People who are involved in analysis, designing, requirement gathering, working directly with the customers, people who are part of the release team or the deployment team, and even the people who are creating a high level plan of the strategy, the release dates, and all this. All these individuals play a very important role for you to provide some inputs or others, for you to address some of the challenges. Your test plan strategy, where it will come from? Somebody must have created that in advance. You will not create your test plan strategy at the sprint level. That has to be defined in advance. So, planning and people who are involved in planning a strategy, they must be conducted by you. You must be any other individuals you work with to get your inputs. Please do share in the chat window or the comment section. Right? You need to be in constant touch with all these individuals to get the required input for you. You will be documenting the same, you will be addressing the same, you will be adding the same. Okay, let's move on further. Apart from the testing docs which we just saw, are there any other docs that you should be looking into? And what would be your role in those documents? So some of those documents are definition of done, definition of ready, working agreement, onboarding, induction, knowledge base, whatever you may say, or a knowledge transfer document. These are some of the other documents where you also play a very important role. What is your role in definition of done? As discussed just few minutes back, right? The testing scope has to be defined. The outcome has to be defined. The deliverable has to be defined. You should be providing your inputs to the team in the definition of done document. And definition of ready document should also talk about what all you need as a prerequisite to start your testing. If those things are not there, your story, your item, your issue is not meeting the definition of ready criteria, and you must not even allow that particular ticket to be picked up during the sprint. Are you empowered to say? For this, you need to reach out to a Scrum Master and Agile coach. I'm assuming you have any of those to take care of those. If not, maybe reach out to senior management on this part. Working agreement. I don't know how many of you, when you have heard about this part, working agreement. Most of you, I have not seen these working agreements anywhere. Very few teams create this. Right? Let me take one example for this working agreement. I'm sure most of you must have played street football. I'm not talking about football in a stadium where with the international rules. Street football. You must have played, most of you. Uh, Different terms that use soccer, or it could be soccer also for you. So somebody says football, somebody says soccer. So, and you might be having your street specific rules during that particular match. Whether the person who brings the ball will always be the center forward, or the person who breaks the mirror of somebody, right, has to pay for it, or entire team vanishes when you end up doing that part. Or it could be when you hit too high, you will be penalized with one goal. It could be any street specific goals. And each street might be having one unique rule which is not known to other street. And suppose one fine day, a team is created by picking individuals from all these streets, and a new team is formed, and they start playing together without having any working agreement, without having any common set of rules defined, without having any discussions on what it should be. I'm sure you can anticipate the mess you will have. To avoid such mess, you need a working agreement. Why? Because Most of you come from different agile backgrounds, and you must have seen each team is using a customized version of agility. There are no predefined rules. Every team has their own set of rules, but those rules are in mind. When different teams are coming with different agile backgrounds, that's a mess. When people with no agile background, that's another mess. Icing on the cake, when agile coach enters with a third mindset and he or she starts preaching, guys, you are doing totally wrong. Then you can go and refer to our working agreement. We are following this smart. This is where working agreement plays a very important role. If you don't have, reach out to your scrum master or agile coach to help you to create that working agreement, to help you create definition of ready, and not just create, use those effectively. And in case you are finding very difficult, you can reach out to A4Q team, you can reach out to me, Renzo, on the email ID which we are going to share at a later stage. Okay, but these documents are very important for you to ensure that all other testing docs which you are creating are updated on time. That's very important. Can we move on? And some very important tips on the documentation. As we discussed, that we are not going to discuss the documents, we are going to discuss how to manage those documents, because you are a tester, you already know what documents you're working on. It's just how to manage those documents effectively. That's what we were going to discuss. uh, there is a thing called free time. Somebody says, no, we never have a free time. But usually, when the sprint starts, usually have some buffer. Use that time very effectively. Okay. Please ensure your definition of done, your definition of ready are updated. Tickets which are not meeting the definition of ready criteria are not pulled into the sprint. Right. You should be empowered for that. Your test strategy should be defined well in advance. Yeah, your scope should be clear. Scope during the sprint, after the sprint, when definition of done stops. Sometimes we miss out raising the documentation flag. We write, if depending on the tool which you're using, if you're Jira or GitLab or any other tool, within Jira you end up creating issues. Okay, but we create an issue which talks about the testing to be done. Somehow we don't create, most of us don't create an issue that X time required for documentation or writing the test cases also. Create those. This will help you to even know how much time you are spending into the documentation. And over a period of time, you will come to know maybe X percentage of time is invested in the documentation. It will help you in a better estimation. Your commitment adherence ratio will increase. Whatever team is committing, you will be able to deliver that. Raise timely flags. If you are not getting something on time, please let Scrum Master announce it to the whole world. Guys, this ticket is not going to be completed because of X reasons. Right? Don't accept the tickets which are not in the sprint backlog. Ensure testing scope is clearly defined in definition of done, and create a single shared common documentation repository. Don't exchange things over email. This will not be able, you will know, nobody will be able to track. If you don't have, create one. If you have, use it effectively. Most of us have the repository, we don't use it effectively. Right? As I was just sharing an example, the discussion lost during the meeting or during email tranches because it never reaches to the story part. And things may be 3 months or 6 months or 1 year down the line. If you yourself visit that story or somebody else comes to maintain and support, the person will be lost. They will be looking for a lot of documentation, a lot of help support, which is not available. These are some of the things which will help you to manage your documents effectively. And if there is no documentation process, create one. Who can help you in creating a documentation process? Your Scrum Master, your Agile coach. And here you might be having your technical writers, technical publication manager, technical writing manager, even the product manager or the business analyst. They can help you in creating a documentation process. As of now, we are not talking about the review cycle and all this, only the documentation things. Again, keep in mind you're writing for others, not yourself. So don't write your documents like a cookbook. Okay, can we move on, Abhi? And as I was saying, keep in mind you're writing for others. Others whom you might have not even seen. Others can be other team members, others can be other scrum teams, others can be other product teams. It can be anyone in the organization, and they could be external users too, depending on how your product is used. How much information they need to know to use the information effectively, right? And if you're making assumptions, please write those assumptions also in those documents. Be clear, be concise. No need to add extra wording. Right? Just to the point information is more than enough. As we were discussing one of the values, the comprehensive documentation. And we were discussing that the word comprehensive is subjective. Definition of the comprehensive can differ for two individuals. And if 9 individuals working together, it will definitely not be the same. And org level, when thousands of people are there, how will you define what is comprehensive for you? That comprehensive word should be defined clearly in the working agreement document which I was referring to. This will help you to write what is it that you need to write, keeping the recipients in mind, keeping the audience in mind, keeping the future readers in mind. And yes, working agreement, DOD, DOR are extremely important. And your active involvement in the backlog refinement too. So all these things play a very important role for you to document your stuff accordingly and even track those things through the tools. We are using mix of things. Sometimes we have the things ready, we don't track. Sometimes we are able to track, we don't enter the time logs. We say we don't have the time, it is time consuming. Document Agile says no tracking. Agile never says no tracking. It takes few seconds to start tracking. Mark my word, it only takes few seconds, not even a complete minute. At the end of the day, you just need to write in a ticket 1 hour for writing test cases. How much time it will take? Will it take more than a minute? It will not. But just see 6 months down the line how much data you have, that you invested this much time in the documentation which was not even tracked or discussed previously. And you know, because of this, your deliverables were impacted. Yes, can we move on? And yes, enterprise agile transformation, it is a journey, not a destination. And this journey leads to innovation, where documentation play a very important role. So the statement which I use in the myths, we are X% agile. There is nothing called X% agile. It's agility is binary. You're agile or you're not agile. After this presentation, after this discussion, any questions coming to you? Define your process, to define your existing ways of working. If yes, maybe some of these trainings might be of some help for you. Reach out to your agile coach, reach out to A4Q team, reach out to your consultants, your scrum masters to conduct and deliver these training. And if you're not finding any help, you can reach to us also. All these trainings play a very important role for you to define your definition of done, your definition of ready, your testing scope, your working agreement, and also how you are going to work on day-to-day basis, how you are going to write and how you're not going to write unwrite. So is there anything that you end up learning today? You feel free to share in chat window, comment section or things. And we look forward to some more discussions if any of you have any questions on this part. Yes, Abhi. Thank you. We can open the Q&A part. If there are any questions, anything, do we have anything?
We do have a couple of questions for you. First one is, I'm not a good writer and English is not my native language. Who can help me write these documents?
Okay, so good question, Abhi. Many engineering team members face these challenges, and they need to be very clear during the planning stage itself, during the discussion stage itself, that I might be needing help for this. Person who can help, there could be a technical writer within the organization or the release team. You can have take the services from those, or you can take the services of editors also. Many teams have the editors, not the writers, technical editors, business analysts also can contribute. Somebody call them product managers. So these 3 4 people can help you to document all these sections. And also the person who's creating the test strategy, that person can also extend help to review the document. And but you need to call it out very openly during the discussions, during the planning stage itself. Guys, I might be needing help to document these things. I can create this draft, but I may not be able to complete or update.
We have another question for you from a member of our audience. Is there value in having tech writers training and exams for testers and programmers?
Very good question. I will, again, no organization will approve that. There is a value, but getting approval from the organization leadership is very difficult. Same thing I've tried at multiple locations. Uh, the best part is, ask your management or ask your agile coach to conduct sessions on how to write internal documentation. So one of my session is uh, documentation by the engineers for the engineers. Okay, where we cover all these things in detail, right? Where we specifically target only the engineering community, which includes developers, testers. And exam, I don't think, because uh, you don't have to be a language expert in this, right? Your task is engineering, keep it to that part. But yes, to bring those engineering thing onto the paper, you do need some help. And here, little training will help a lot.
Rajeev, thank you so much for your valuable presentation. We've unfortunately run out of time for our session today. I'd like to encourage our audience to please stay tuned because there will be more presentations throughout the day. And also visit our website, click on our program, and you can vote for Rajeev as one of our best presentations. Our awards will be going out within the next weeks. Rajeev, thank you again so much for your insights. We value you and your presentation.
Thank you so much, Abby, and thank you so much to A4Q team for allowing us this session. And apologies that Renzo could not join due to technical issues. Right? I'm sure we shared some insights, some learnings which you can take back to the work. Thank you all. Thank you for joining. Have a great day to all of you.
Thank you, Rajeev. Bye-bye.